Welcome to the Matchfit Conditioning Podcast. Transforming over 100,000 footballers worldwide. Everything we do is aimed at enabling you to gain an edge completely by yourself without needing help from a training partner or teammate. Open yourself to doing things smarter and with more intention, focus and attention to detail than your teammates, opponents, and even your coaches. Are you ready to get match fit?
Hi guys, and welcome to Matchfit Conditioning. Today's question is going to be on what are the best supplements for football players. Obviously, I'm sure you're probably one of the majority of athletes that has delved into the sort of supplement market and probably ended up purchasing some supplements that could be labelled essentially as useless. So what I really want this video to do is just pinpoint those sort of main free supplements that can be added on top of your diet to have a performance enhancing effect. And these supplements are going to be the ones that have actually been proven both in the scientific research and are also implemented by some of the top sports teams in the country to either benefit your performance on the pitch or even enhance your sort of adaptations to training as well, so sort of have one of those two benefits. So to start with, what I would consider probably the best supplement within sport, and a supplement which essentially all athletes can benefit from, is going to be caffeine. And the reason caffeine's so good is because it can have such a wide range of benefits. It's been studied and been shown to be beneficial within endurance-based sports, strength-based sports, power-based sports, and even football specifically. Within the last 10 years, there's been a lot of research that shows caffeine can have direct influence on not just cognitive performance and things such as brain function, but also physical performance and even benefit the technical aspects of the game. So improving things such as your sprinting ability, jumping performance, reactive agility, and even things like your passing accuracy have shown to be improved when you take caffeine prior to exercise. How caffeine is able to have these effects is by being able to cross the blood-brain barrier and modulate the central nervous system. And what this modulation does is essentially increases the concentration of a lot of hormones that are beneficial to performance, such as adrenaline and dopamine. And what the increased concentrations of these hormones can do is not only delay fatigue when you're out on the pitch, or especially in a competitive match, but it can also have a benefit to your concentration levels when you're on the pitch. And what I think's the best benefit of caffeine is it can decrease the perception of exertion for a given intensity of exercise. So essentially, if you're sprinting down the pitch for 10-20 meters, it can reduce the amount that you think that you're exerting yourself within this activity, and therefore it's going to have a really significant impact on how you feel out on the field, and it can reduce your perceptions of fatigue both physically and mentally. In terms of the amount of caffeine that you need prior to exercise to get these beneficial effects, this is going to really depend on the individual. Specifically, it's going to come down to how much caffeine you generally take in on a day-to-day basis, usually associated with how much sort of coffee or tea or drinking or any other type of caffeine substances. And because if you're taking in caffeine regularly, you're going to have a diminished response to a given dose of caffeine. But in general, most athletes will fall somewhere between needing 75 milligrams of caffeine up to around 200 milligrams of caffeine in about 15 to 30 minutes prior to exercise. If you do have a diminished response to caffeine and a higher caffeine tolerance because you consume caffeine so much, then I would look to stretch the caffeine intake up to around 300 milligrams, but I wouldn't go too much past this because you might end up getting some side effects that aren't really wanted when you're out there performing. The way in which you should take caffeine, as you probably know, it's available in a variety of different forms. You can take it within energy drinks, you can have it in pill form, or you can also have it in sort of like standard drinks such as your coffees as well. Really, I mean, although there are slight differences in how fast the caffeine is able to be absorbed and have an effect between these sort of different sources. I wouldn't concern yourself too much with this. I'd just go with the one that is most convenient for you. Moving on to the second supplement, which I would recommend for a lot of footballers to consider. This is going to be creatine. Specifically, I know there are a lot of creatines out there on the market now, specifically creatine monohydrate. How creatine is able to have a beneficial effect for athletes is because it's able to increase the phosphocreatine stores within muscle tissue. Phosphocreatine is stored within muscle tissue, and it's a really critical substance for the enzymatic reactions which create energy during high intensity activity such as short sprints or jumping. So what creatine essentially does is it's able to regenerate this phosphocreatine store to be able to participate in more of these energetic reactions to fuel your high intensity activity. So in theory, you should be able to have more sprints during a game, have more jumps during a game, and be generally just more active without fatiguing. Because creatine is also able to improve high intensity activity, it can also be used and be beneficial for training purposes, especially in footballers that are looking to increase their strength in the gym or increase their power and even their lean body mass as well. And because ideally it can make you have better performance during training sessions, especially weightlifting sessions or resistance-based sessions, and so you're able to adapt to these training sessions better because you're pushing more weight and having a higher overall work volume within these training sessions. To take creatine and for it to have a positive effect, what needs to happen is it needs to be loaded into the muscle tissue effectively. So a lot of footballers think that creatine has an acute effect, so essentially that you might take it and it has a positive effect within say 15-30 minutes, much like caffeine. However, this is definitely not the case. What you do is you need to take creatine regularly, so every 24 hours, and take enough of it for the creatine stores within the muscle tissue to load up to an optimal rate for this creatine to have an effect. The best protocol to have for creatine supplementation is to start by taking 20 grams of creatine monohydrate for approximately 5 to 7 days, and then after this you can take 5 grams of creatine per day to maintain these stores. So what the 20 grams per day does is essentially overloads the muscle and it's able to accelerate the process of increasing creatine stores within the muscle tissue. But then after this, as creatine stores in the muscle tissue are maximized, only around about 5 grams is needed just to maintain those high stores. The time in which you take this creatine shouldn't be that big a concern for you. What you should really just focus on is consuming that dose of creatine in each 24-hour period. There is some scientific research that maybe consuming creatine post-workout is able to increase the absorption. However, it's new evidence. If you do want to practice this, then go ahead. But generally, just most of you should focus on getting in that creatine every 24 hours to keep that loading going. And then finally, the last supplement which I'd recommend for footballers to think about consuming is going to be beta-alanine. Beta-alanine is a much newer substance compared to creatine and caffeine. However, there have been some really good studies on it recently, and so I would put it in the category of not essential supplements, but supplements that athletes should really seriously consider taking. The benefit of beta-alanine supplementation is that it's able to reduce fatigue or delay fatigue during high intensity activity. How it does this is by acting as an intracellular buffer, so a buffer within muscle cells, to the accumulation of hydrogen ions that are often accumulated during high intensity exercise, and they would often put the muscle in a more acidic state, which will often contribute to the muscle cell at least, not functioning correctly, and it can reduce the time in which it takes to fatigue. So higher carnosine stores within the muscle reduces the amount of hydrogen ions that are accumulated, and it can keep the cell in a more neutral state. Much like creatine supplementation, beta-alanine is, like I said, going to be effective at loading those carnosine stores and increasing those carnosine stores within the muscle tissue. So it's a supplement again that needs to be taken on a daily basis to allow for that gradual loading of carnosine over time. In terms of the dosing of beta-alanine, it's not quite there yet with establishing the specific dosage that can have an effect in most athletes. However, there is sort of like a range at the minute which seems to be beneficial, and that's going to be somewhere between 2 to 5 grams of beta-alanine per day. Again, similarly to creatine, the time in which you take this beta-alanine isn't of the most importance. Generally, just be taking it within every 24-hour period. A lot of footballers do like to take it pre-exercise, just because this amount of beta-alanine can cause the majority of individuals to have quite a sometimes minor, sometimes major tingling sensation, especially within the fingers and the feet, but it can be anywhere on the body. And footballers generally find that out on the pitch they don't actually notice it that much, but it can be a real nuisance if you're just at home resting. So keep this in mind when you're thinking about taking your beta-alanine. So I think that really wraps up the main 3 supplements that I'd recommend for footballers. There are a few other things such as functional foods, which are often mistaken as supplements, such as your protein powders and your omega-3s, which I view as in a different category, and they should really have a separate video for themselves.
Thanks for tuning into the Matchfit Conditioning Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with one of your teammates. To learn more about the Matchfit method and to start your training with us, visit www.matchfitconditioning.com. We'll show you how to gain an edge on the pitch at an elite level by transforming your fitness level, nutrition, and mindset.